Imagine chilling on a boat one morning, not realizing you'd just killed a total stranger over a mile away. This was called the most confusing murder mystery ever until the bizarre truth was finally revealed. It was the 7th of July 1967 in Brooklyn, New York. Nancy McEwen was a 17-year-old senior at Garden City High School. Now, she was making her way to her summer job that morning at 8:40 a.m. She was driving along around 45 miles an hour when suddenly the unthinkable happened. Commuters were stunned to see that her car out of nowhere just suddenly veered off the road and plunged into the bushes. Now, a police officer had actually just happened to be behind her driving at this point, so he immediately stopped to check on her. However, when he approached the vehicle, he found the girl unconscious. He had no idea what had happened. There were no obvious indications as to what had suddenly caused her to swerve off the road. He rang an ambulance, but sadly, the girl did not survive. She was examined by medical staff, and they strangely found a small puncture wound behind her ear. It almost looked like she'd been shot. But there was no bullet, no shell casing, and weirdly no blood. The officer driving behind her at that point had also not seen or heard a gunshot. Nancy had no enemies. Why on earth would a random person want to kill a teenage girl on her way to work? Police started speaking with locals and people who'd been nearby at the time to see if they'd heard or seen anything suspicious. This was literally like looking for a needle in a haystack. There were over 2 million people living in Brooklyn at that time. They went knocking door to door and came across a petrol station. They spoke to a member of the public called Theodore, who actually just so happened to have a miraculous story to tell them. Theodore had been out fishing that morning and had been practicing shots with his rifle. He saw a beer can floating in the water and decided, just spur of the moment, to try and hit it. However, the bullet narrowly missed the can and instead ricocheted off the water. It veered into the direction of the road just as Nancy was driving with her window down, straight past the bullet's path. This man had absolutely no idea he'd just killed somebody over a mile away. Now, he was originally charged with Nancy's murder, but it was eventually deemed to have been a total accident. And let's be honest, if he was actually trying to do that, I don't think he could have done it if he literally sat there for a million years.
This man is pure evil, and this case makes me realize that not everyone deserves to have kids. Sterling Cummings spent 45 days in jail 10 years ago for shaking his first baby. He's now been charged with murdering his second son. In August of 2012, Sterling was arrested for shaking his 3-week-old son named Andy so badly that he went fully blind and now has cerebral palsy. Sterling and the baby's mom, Brianne, were charged with child abuse, but from what I can find, Brianne left the state and was never prosecuted. As for Sterling, he was sentenced to 45 days in jail. That's it, 45 days in jail for permanently injuring his 3-week-old baby. His children were then placed into foster care, but Sterling would go on to get arrested again in 2015 in an unrelated incident for beating and strangling a woman. Fast forward to May of 2021. Paramedics were called to Sterling's home in Greensboro, North Carolina, and found his 3-month-old son, Waylon, unresponsive. According to Waylon's mom, she left the house to go and grab some food, and at that time, Waylon was perfectly healthy. When she returned home, she noticed that the bottle of milk that she made Waylon was untouched, and when she asked Sterling about this, he said that he didn't hear Waylon, so he didn't bother to feed him. And when she checked on her son, he wasn't breathing. Waylon later died at the hospital, where he was found to have retinal hemorrhaging and an abnormal MRI. During the investigation, Sterling's story changed many times, and the scene was described by police as suspicious. But it would take 2 years, and also being charged with 2 separate counts of assault on a woman, for Sterling to be arrested for murdering his son. On May 22, 2023, Sterling was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder and felony child abuse. During his first court hearing, he showed absolutely no emotion. People who know Sterling described him as manipulative and a sociopath, and would likely do it again if given the chance, so hopefully he gets life in prison.
Ladies, do not let a man cook for you unless you run a background check on him first. Story time. Let us begin. Okay, so this girl goes on vacation and she meets a guy online, okay? They go on their first date and hit it off. Like, this guy is a green flag all throughout. He's doing everything right. So obviously she's telling her friends that this guy is like her perfect man. I'm seeing a pattern of girls dealing with these weird men on vacation, so just be careful when you go on vacation. So obviously when this guy is doing everything right, her literal dream man asks her on a second date, she doesn't even think twice. She says, of course. And he's like saying all these things like, I'm gonna bring you over to my home. I wanna cook a nice hot warm meal for you. Like, she's eating it up. She's like, yes, like, oh my gosh, he's a perfect guy and he can cook. So she doesn't even think twice. She says yes. She doesn't even think, oh, he could be a criminal. She just says yes and goes. So the day of the second date comes and she goes over to his house and he cooks her a whole great meal and he lets her know like, hey, I'm a vegan, so this may taste a little bit different. And she actually enjoys the meal. She's like, oh my God, she's looking at this guy like, you're my husband, like you're my soulmate, you're good at all these things and you can cook. So she devours that meal and they have a great second date and she goes home. Remember, he told her that he's a vegan. Keep that in mind. I also want to add, she was super impressed with how clean and unlived in his house looks, okay? Immediately the next day, this girl starts feeling sick as hell, like she cannot stop throwing up. So she goes to the hospital. Obviously, the hospital runs their checks and the doctor comes back to her and says, listen, in the last 24 hours, have you by any chance ingested human flesh? Yeah, human flesh. So obviously she's sitting there in shock and she's like, what did these people just say to me? And then it clicks in her head that the last meal she ate was the meal that her dream husband man cooked for her. And she can't believe it. So obviously this becomes a police situation. She tells them everything. They obviously go to his house to find out that it was an Airbnb rented out in a completely different name than his. And they obviously went to like her dating app to find anything of him. Everything was wiped. As I always say, I hope you guys did not enjoy this video. And ladies, please just be safe and mindful about the people around you, whether it's in your own city or on vacation, because you have to understand that not everyone has your best interests at heart. And that's just the sad truth and reality of things. So one stupid decision of yours could literally change your whole life. So just keep that in mind. Love you guys. Bye.
She had found dozens of children's remains inside of a semi-truck.
Imagínate que lleguen y la vean así. Ya tranquilizarse para llegar bien a su casa a cuidar.
In 2019, a woman was working at a gas station in Michoacan, Mexico, inspecting semi-trucks. On this day, a semi-truck had pulled into the gas station and immediately something seemed off about the driver. The driver seemed very tense and was sweating profusely. She noticed that the back of the semi-truck was slightly open, so she decided to take a look and was immediately regretting that decision. Inside that semi-truck, she found dozens upon dozens of children's remains inside. There was blood on the floor of the semi-truck and also big black bags, and inside those bags were the limbs of those children. Just days after this discovery was made, the woman ended up going missing and was found days later in a parking lot decapitated. Right next to her body was a note that said, "This is what happens when you saw what you shouldn't have. Don't be a snitch."
Alright, buckle up guys, because I have a crazy story for you today. This case has always felt like something out of a Lifetime movie. A popular pretty cheerleader arrested for unaliving her newborn, a baby that she kept secret from everybody. Brooke Skylar Richardson, who went by Skylar, was in her senior year of high school when she made it a doctor's appointment to get on birth control. But instead found out that she was 32 weeks pregnant and would be giving birth in weeks. Skylar's doctor said that everything looked normal with her baby and for some reason still gave Skylar the prescription for birth control pills. I guess like Skylar told the doctor that her mother took her to get birth control pills so her mother would be angry if she left without them. Still, I don't get the doctor's reasoning for this. And then Skylar says that she just went on with life as normal and didn't tell anyone that she was pregnant. Days after Skylar's senior prom, she gave birth alone in the bathroom to a baby girl. And then she buried her baby in the backyard of the family home. And whether or not Skylar's baby was alive when she gave birth to her is the question that has had people debating for years. And whether or not Skylar's mother knew that her 18-year-old daughter was secretly pregnant. Skylar suffered with ED since she was 12 and had been in and out of treatment many times for it, a condition that her parents said they took very, very seriously. I don't know if I buy this is something that they were taking seriously because the morning after Skylar gave birth, she texted her mom and I quote, "I'm literally speechless about how happy I am. My belly is back." And her mom said that wasn't something that she was concerned about. Also, Skylar's doctors apparently accidentally emailed Skylar's mother Skylar's pregnancy results. Something that Skylar's mother said that Skylar just kind of explained away, but yeah, I don't think I buy that. Allegedly, Skylar's mother was like obsessed with public image and like their reputation, so is it possible that she actually knew about her daughter's pregnancy and her daughter's plan to get rid of the baby. Skylar does admit to taking the birth control pills after she already knew she was pregnant, and a search of her internet history showed results like how to get rid of a baby. But to this day, Skylar and her parents are very adamant that no one knew about Skylar's pregnancy but Skylar, and that the baby was born stillborn. But the prosecution in Skylar's case are sure that she unalived her baby because she never wanted her and she never planned to keep her. And personally, my opinion does lie that this was something that Skylar intended to do. I just don't see what her plan was. If she supposedly kept the secret from everyone and gave birth alone in the bathroom, what was she supposed to do then? Just give birth alone in the bathroom and then wrap her baby up in a towel, bring her to her parents and set up a mom now? That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand. No. But unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, for either side, Skylar was only found guilty of abuse of a body and only given a couple years of probation. And since then, the records of her case have been sealed to the public. Personally, I really do think that this was kind of like a rushed investigation and a rush to trial. I don't think they had enough to prove that she was guilty, and I am someone who does truly believe that you need to prove someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and I just don't think they did here. But you know what my opinion is on this case? Share what your opinion is with me in the comments.
He was just yards away from home when two teens stabbed him from behind before realizing they had the wrong person. Ronan Kanda was just 16 years old when he was killed in Wolverhampton on June 29, 2022. He had been walking home after briefly visiting a friend's house to pick up a PlayStation controller, and he was only seconds away from his front door when the attack happened. Two teenagers had been searching for someone else who owed them money. Ronan had nothing to do with it, but because he just left the same address, they mistook him as the intended target. CCTV shows them running up behind him on a residential street. There was no warning, no confrontation, and no chance for Ronan to react before he was stabbed from behind. He collapsed just yards away from his home. Only after the attack did it become clear that they had the wrong person. Ronan wasn't involved in any of this. Hell, they didn't even know him. It was a case of mistaken identity with fatal consequences. What makes it even harder to process is how close he was to safety. His front door was right there. If the timing was slightly different, if he had been a few steps further along, he would have made it inside to his family. Ronan's family described him as the heart of everything. Someone kind, funny, and full of life. He had just finished his final exams and was looking forward to his future. A future that was taken from him in a moment that can't be undone. Praji Vadesa was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years for the stabbing. Sukhman Shargul was also sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 16 years for his involvement in the attack. Both were told they would serve many years before being considered for parole. What do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Do you guys remember last year when this Alabama prisoner escaped with the help of jail employee Vicky White, who had a romantic relationship together? 56-year-old Vicky White worked at the Lauderdale County Jail for nearly 2 decades, and her last day on the job was April 29, 2022. But instead of celebrating with her coworkers, she planned the escape of 38-year-old Casey White, who was serving a 75-year prison sentence over multiple charges, including attempted murder from 2015. The two had been in a romantic relationship for 2 years when they planned the escape together, and when that day finally came, they were on the run for 11 days, which resulted in a manhunt across 3 states. Casey was recaptured in Evansville, Indiana. But leading up to the capture, Vicky died by suicide following a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Last month, Casey pleaded guilty to first-degree escape in exchange for having a felony murder charge involving Vicky's death dropped. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the court hearing, Casey stated, quote, "I loved Vicky. I wouldn't drag her name through the mud for anyone in this courtroom. Vicky took me out because she said right was right, wrong is wrong. She was the first person who gave me a hug in 6 years. We just wanted a new life together. I chose this road and it cost me my life and freedom." End quote. He apologized to Vicky's family and said that her only regret was leaving them behind. At the court hearing, Casey also said that Vicky helped him escape because she thought it was unfair that he was still in jail when others have been accused of worse crimes and have been let out. But his charges from 2015 included home invasion, 2 carjackings, multiple shootings which left a dog dead and a woman injured, and he'd also tried to kill his then-girlfriend and hold her roommates hostage. Casey is also still facing a capital murder trial for the murder of Connie Ridgway, who was found stabbed to death on her living room floor on October 23, 2015. Police in Rogersville, Alabama investigated her murder, but her case would go cold for 5 years until Casey White, who was already in jail, confessed to her murder. He has since recanted his confession and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but he knew details about the murder that were never publicized. That trial is set to begin on August 14th.
Patrick Clancy, did he do it? Let's get into it. Did you know that the nanny cameras inside the home were not working, specifically on the day that Lindsay decided to murder her children due to the Wi-Fi being down? What's crazy to me is that Patrick worked in the tech industry for 14 years. So if he had to mess with the Wi-Fi, it must be like light work to him, right? Patrick claimed that when he got home, Lindsay was conscious and told him that she had tried to off herself and that the children were in the basement. But when police got to the home, Lindsay was unconscious. People are saying that it is not possible for Lindsay to have been conscious and just fully explaining everything to Patrick after such an extreme fall and after suffering from all of those injuries. It all seems a little too convenient. Lindsay admits everything to just Patrick, and then happens to pass out unconscious right before the cops arrive. What really scares me is how fast Patrick Clancy moved on, and who exactly he moved on with. Just 4 months after the murder of his 3 children, Patrick decides to start fresh and move to New York. 1 year after the murder of his children, Patrick started dating Dr. Rachel Dennis, and the two of them just got married in April of 2026. Honestly, this is just something that stood out to me, but Lindsay Clancy and Dr. Rachel look eerily similar to each other. On top of everything, Lindsay barely remembers anything from that day. She's very delirious, confused, lost, and you can see that on her face in the courtroom. By the way, you guys, this is all alleged, and just to clear some things up, the trial happening right now is not trying to determine who killed the 3 children. It is trying to determine if Lindsay Clancy is criminally responsible for murdering her children, or if she is not guilty due to her severe mental illness. But other than that, what do you guys think about this case?
Imagine you and 2 of your friends are student filmmakers shooting a documentary in the woods in Maryland but end up going missing. But 1 year later, the footage was found. In the start of the footage, you're being filmed by your 2 friends so that the 3 of you can go film a documentary on the legend of the Blair Witch. You guys interview residents about the legend, and they tell you about this man named Rustin Parr who resided in the forest, and he had unalived 7 kids in the 1940s. You guys make your way over to a house where supposedly a crazy lady lives, and she tells you that she has actually encountered the Blair Witch before. She describes the Blair Witch being full of fur like if they were wearing a shawl. You guys then make your way to the forest to meet 2 fishermen, and they tell you a story about a kid who went missing in 1888 and came back 3 days later and had met the Blair Witch. At this point, it's getting late, so you all decide to get in the tent and go to sleep. The next morning, one of you guys hears strange noises outside of the tent, and that's when you realize that you guys are lost after looking at the map. You guys continue with your hike and find 7 piles of rocks and figure out that it's from a burial ground. One of you guys accidentally knocks over the pile of rocks, and later that night, you hear sticks breaking outside of the tent. The next morning, you guys are trying to find your car, but realize you're lost, so you decide to set up camp again. You then start to notice really strange things that have to do with witchcraft, and even one of your friends goes missing, and later that night you hear his cry for help but cannot locate him. The next night you can hear his cries for help again, and you and your friend go looking for him, and it leads you to a nearby house. Inside the home are demonic symbols and small handprints on the walls. Your friend decides to go downstairs to the basement when an unknown entity attacks him, and you go downstairs to see what's going on, and you see him facing a wall and try to get his attention, but he won't turn around. Eventually, that same unknown entity attacks you and you drop the camera. The end.
What would you do if you were just scrolling social media and then noticed your neighbor posted a video saying he was going to execute people? Then the bodies just start piling up. It was August 2022 in a normally quiet neighborhood in Butler Township, Ohio. Clyde and Eva Knox lived in the neighborhood. They were absolutely adorable. They've been married for 60 years. They had 2 adult children and they had a bunch of grandchildren that they absolutely adored. Sarah Anderson also lived in the town with her husband Brett and daughters Olivia and 15-year-old Kayla. Sarah was a great mum to those girls. She was super kind and genuine, and she was really the life and soul of the party. Kayla loved playing football, or soccer if you're in the US, and she was described as just like her mum. She was funny, she was a social butterfly, and she always gave 100% in anything she did. It really felt like the neighborhood was full of kind, genuine, lovely people. Then there was Stephen Marlowe. He was in his 40s and living in the neighborhood with his parents. On the 5th of the month, he posted a rambling video on social media claiming that he and his family members were being operated on with mind control. He explained he would be launching an attack on those people that he felt were responsible. Terrifyingly, he announced his plans to execute them. Police raced to the scene around 11:40 a.m. after people heard gunfire and called emergency services. But it was sadly too late for 4 victims. Responders entered the home of Clyde and Eva Knox to find them shot dead in their garage. Clyde had been sitting in a lawn chair and Eva had been standing in the doorway. Then another shocking discovery. Sarah was found dead inside her home after literally just coming home from doing the food shop. Her daughter Kayla had been shot dead while chatting on the phone with a friend. Now Stephen had seemingly gone on the run rather than thankfully taking any further victims in the neighborhood, and he was tracked down and arrested the following day in Kansas. He told officers he was a victim of mind control and he called himself a targeted individual. Now this is apparently a term used by people who believe a microchip is implanted in their brains. He accused his neighbors of being attackers who were influencing his thoughts telepathically, and he said that he was sacrificing himself to help expose this. Despite being charged with 4 counts of murder, he was ruled currently incompetent to stand trial, much to the frustration of the victims' families.
2 women from the same city with the exact same name were unalived 3 days apart from each other. Coincidence, or is there something more sinister at play here? When Mary Lou Morris never arrived at work, her husband reported her missing, and later that night her body was found in her vehicle that had been burned. Because she was badly burned, her cause of unaliving could not be determined. Mary Lou Morris had no known enemies and her marriage was very much intact. And then 3 days later, another Houston resident, also named Mary Morris, suffered a similar end. Mary McGinnis Morris was also found in her car. Her cause of unaliving was a shot to the head, but unlike the first Mary Morris, this time we had suspects. In the weeks leading up to her unaliving, her and her husband were having serious marital issues. There was also a male coworker that was seriously creeping Mary McGinnis Morris out. And after this coworker had been fired, a note that read "death to her" was found on Mary McGinnis Morris's desk. Now, it couldn't be proven that this coworker left the note on Mary McGinnis Morris's desk, but it was enough to make her want to get a gun. Like I said, Mary McGinnis Morris and her husband were having serious issues. Mary McGinnis Morris had a life insurance policy out on her for $700,000, and after her unaliving, her husband immediately lawyered up and refused to take a polygraph. The most widely believed theory on this case was that Mary Lou Morris was a victim of mistaken identity, and that someone had hired a hit against Mary McGinnis Morris, and since the 2 women had the same name, were from the same neighborhood, and looked similar, the hitman targeted the wrong Mary Morris. All I know is that the odds of this being a coincidence is like 1 in 1 billion. To this day, neither case has ever been solved, and the 2 cases have never been even officially linked. The fact that the cases were never even linked is probably the most bizarre detail of this for me, but let me know what you think in the comments.
When I tell you this is the most terrifying, full body chills place I have ever been to, I am not lying. Okay, just aside from the fact that this is a Klan meeting building deep in Appalachia, East Tennessee, there are other things about this place that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Listen to this and tell me what you think. So I'm home for Thanksgiving and my sister brings up this old building where Klan members used to meet. That's literally right down the road from our family's house. And I'm like, what do you mean there's an old Klan building? And she's like, yeah, it's an old abandoned Klan building. And apparently someone recently went to go check it out, and the police came because there's surveillance cameras. I then called my mom to ask her about it, and my mom was also like, yeah, that's where they used to have old Klan meetings. Like, don't go there. It's heavily guarded, like under surveillance. Okay, so if you followed me for any extended amount of time, you know that this is something that I've got to go check out. So here's the video footage of us driving towards this house. It is so creepy just even driving back through there. Then we pull up to this old abandoned building, and it's got graffiti all over it and everything. But what is so strange to me is that the whole building is under surveillance. And there's also these posted signs warning people to stay away because the property is it's under surveillance by the city police department. Like, y'all, I was fully prepared to go back in there and check it out, but once I saw these signs posted and the video surveillance, Why are they guarding this building so heavily? What's back there? What are they trying to hide? The feeling that I got while I was there just felt so sinister, and I can't explain it. What do you all think?
She thought she got a babysitting job, but then she never made it home. What happened to Margaret Ellen Fox? Margaret Ellen Fox was 14 years old and living in Burlington, New Jersey when she disappeared on June 24th, 1974. She was known as a very responsible teenager. She had just graduated from St. Paul's School 2 weeks prior, and she would be heading into high school the following school year. She loved horses and was taking piano lessons, and she had 5 brothers. She also decided she wanted to make some money along with her 11-year-old cousin Lynn, so they posted an ad in the paper for a babysitting job. This ad ran on June 18th, 1974, and the following day, a man named John Marshall would contact her. He would say that he needed somebody to babysit his 5-year-old son. He was willing to pay $40 plus her bus fare, and at the end of each day, he or his wife would end up driving her home. He lived over in Mount Holly, which was about 7 miles away from where she lived. And Lynn's parents would end up saying that Lynn couldn't do it with her, so it would just be Margaret. Margaret's father had actually spoken with this man on the phone, and he says based on his voice, he thought he was between 35 and 40 years old. Although in my opinion, I think it's really hard to pinpoint an age based on a voice. Unless you're really young or really old, I don't think our voices change that much that I could say somebody was within a 5-year range, but I don't know. Margaret made plans to start the job and would take a bus to Mount Holly on June 24th, 1974. That morning, Margaret got ready to go, and her brother walked her to the bus stop. She got on the bus at 8:40 a.m. So she was supposed to get off on the corner of Mill and High Streets, and John said that he or his wife would meet her in a red Volkswagen to pick her up. Witnesses did see her near Mill and High Streets, but she was never seen again after this. She was supposed to call her parents when she arrived, but she never did. They didn't get too worried because they thought maybe she forgot, or she was just so excited that she forgot. But then she never returns home. So they start calling the number that they have for John Marshall over and over and over again. Well, eventually, a random person answers. They find out that it was a payphone outside a supermarket in Lumberton, New Jersey. So they started looking for her and would file a missing persons report. Law enforcement would actually put something on the Fox family phone that would record all incoming or outgoing calls. And they, several hours later, would receive a call, and this is what it was.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping.
Who was it?
They were not able to trace the call because it was too short, and they never received instructions on what to do. But they did receive 2 letters. The first letter said the same thing as the phone call, basically, and the family actually went to the bank and withdrew that money and just waited for what to do with it. But 2 days later, they received another letter, basically saying the same thing, but this time referring to Margaret in the past tense. The caller and whoever sent those letters has never been identified. Through the years, they have looked into several suspects, one of which in 1976, a convict, Charles Clobridge, had confessed to her disappearance and dumping her remains in the mountains, but later he recanted his confession and they determined he was not responsible for this. An offender who drove a red Volkswagen in Mount Holly was investigated and cleared, and there was also a man named John Marshall who worked at a grocery store near the payphone, but he was also cleared. And that's pretty much it. Margaret's parents would pass away without ever finding out what happened to her. The FBI would put out an enhanced version of the call in 2019, the one we listened to, and then they would also put out a new age-progressed photo of what Margaret would look like at 56 years old. As of July 2026, Margaret Ellen Fox remains missing. John Marshall has never been identified. If you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Margaret, you can contact the Burlington Police Department. Thank you for listening to Margaret's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime. And if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggested case form in my link tree in my bio.
Part 2 of the Son of Sam case. So, Black Labrador Harvey is possessed by a demon, and he's telling David to commit these crimes. You can't make this shit up, you know? David claimed that he actually tried to kill this dog to stop the demon, but supernatural forces stopped him from killing the dog. Some believe he said this to try and get the insanity plea, but I don't even think he actually got that. June 12th of 1978, he was sentenced to 6 life sentences, 365 years maximum behind bars. He ended up murdering 6 people and wounding 7. And apparently there was a song that inspired him to kill alone, which a lot of people suspected, but no one was ever charged for helping him or anything. But this was a big thing. The case was reopened. People really thought that he didn't work alone. People still think that he didn't work alone, but none of that was ever proven. David is still alive, still in prison, and he describes himself as a born-again Christian.
What would you tell 23-year-old David Berkowitz today?
Turn around before it's too late, because destruction is coming, you know. And as far as I'm concerned, that was not me. That was not me. That name, I hate that name. I despise that name.
Which name?
That moniker, Son of Sam. That was a demon.
He tried to get parole in 2004, but was rejected. I'm not gonna lie, I've seen a lot of his in-jail interviews, and they do seem really sincere. I mean, I don't know if they really are, but he seems like a really reformed person. He couldn't be. He was only 24 when he committed these crimes, so who knows? But just because he's reading a Bible doesn't mean that he can be forgiven for the death of 6 people and the amount of people that would have then affected. Family, friends.
I need to buy a used car, to rent an apartment. I got a job as a security guard. I enrolled in Bronx Community College. I wanted to have a future, you know, and I don't know, everything got turned upside down. I had good goals, and I just fell into under some kind of powerful influence. I mean, threw my life away. I hurt other people and destroyed their lives, and I'm sorry for that. I can't change the past anymore. If I only knew what I was getting into at the beginning.
Here is a clip of one of David's victims actually talking about his experience.
Stacy was killed because she said, "Robert, let's go." And I said, 5 more minutes. That 5 minutes is when we got shot. So if I would have left when she said, I probably would have, she would be alive today. It just consumed me.
Have you found it in here to forgive David Berkowitz?
No, not even for a heartbeat, not even for a second.
That interview made me so sad. I feel so bad for him because, he talks about the guilt that he feels. I can't imagine how that leaves you. Also, survivor's guilt is a huge thing as well, plus what he mentioned. You know, this is the thing, David might seem reformed and he might seem remorseful, but that doesn't take away the pain that is probably still being felt by people today because of his actions. David is apparently, taking his mistakes and trying to teach others not to go down that path, which, you know what? Good on him for doing that. That is all for this case. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. After watching those interviews, do you think that he deserves a second chance or no? Also, what case would you like to see next? That's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
This reporter was taken hostage on live TV and did the most insane thing ever. It was the 19th of August 1987 in KNBC TV's studio in Burbank, California. David Horowitz worked at the studio as a news presenter and was doing a live segment about mail order shopping. Then suddenly, out of the blue, a random man burst on the set. The stranger suddenly shoved a gun into David's back, to which he looked confused and turned around and said, "Pardon me?" Then it obviously dawned on David what was going on. He could see the weapon being pointed in his back, and he could see that the man was trying to give him a piece of paper. And bless him, he got his glasses out and just started suddenly trying to read this piece of information that the man was giving to him, but he really calmly also addressed the gunman. He firstly said in a very calm way, "Folks, we have someone on the set who is standing here and would like me to read this." It's actually wild to me how calm he stayed and how casual he was. He actually turned to the gunman and asked him what his name was, and it almost seemed like he was going to start to try and interview him. He said, "Do you want to tell me your name?" And then, sensing that he was irritated, he decided to read out the message that the gunman had given to him that he was forcing him to read on live TV. It was basically a rambling note about the CIA. He was clearly a very mentally unwell man. But little did the gunman know that the live cameras had obviously been cut, they weren't still broadcasting this out to the world. The people in the studio had obviously immediately called police and they were racing to the scene. Officers were preparing to deal with the situation when David actually finished reading that script and the gunman put the weapon down. Another news reporter there, John Beard, actually reached over and grabbed the weapon straight away. It actually turned out to be a replica and not a real weapon at all. It was just obviously made to look that way. I think it was a BB gun. It was empty anyway, and the man was later identified as Gary Stallman, the son of a previous KNBC reporter, Max. He'd apparently been allowed to enter the studio. I think it wasn't as strict as it is now back then, to observe the news broadcast, but nobody had any idea of his true intentions that day. Gary was obviously arrested, but it turned out that he had a history of psychiatric illness. I think he'd even stayed in psychiatric facilities before he was very unwell. He essentially avoided any jail time for this incident, but I think legislation on real-looking toys was changed as a result of this.
I'm so thankful we have DNA testing and a DNA database, because if it wasn't for that, this suspect probably would have gotten away with murder, and who knows how many other women he would have SA'd and brutally murdered. This is Hope Denise Hall. She lives in Richmond, Virginia, and she has a 3-year-old son who she splits custody with the child's father. She is a news reporter for NBC in Richmond, Virginia. In July of '94, Hope did not show up for work, so they did a welfare check on her apartment, and they had found her in the bedroom deceased. She had been stabbed multiple times and also SA'd. There was no forced entry into the apartment. In fact, the front door was locked. They also found no signs of a robbery. There was a bloody handprint on the wall, but unfortunately the prints were too smudged. They found 2 bent knives on the kitchen counter, one on the bed, and one in the bathroom sink with the water still running. They also found a broken drinking glass in the kitchen and also a blood trail leading from the kitchen to the bedroom, and then the phone that was in the bedroom had been ripped off of the wall. Now, thankfully, Hope's son was with his father at the time of her murder. Now, the father of Hope's son, he voluntarily gave a DNA sample, and he also had an alibi, so he was ruled out. There was a couple witnesses that saw a man without a shirt on running from Hope's apartment, and he had a tattoo on his chest and his arm, and it looked like Greek symbols, like the symbol of Omega Psi Phi, which is a college fraternity. Hope had recently dated a man that sounds like the man in the description, and he became very abusive when she tried to end the relationship, and his name is Leroy Quick. He claims he is not involved, but the 2 witnesses identified him, but his DNA was not a match to the semen or the blood found at the crime scene. The case goes cold for 2 years until they run the DNA again and try a different test, and this time they get a hit in the system to a man named Shermaine Johnson. He's already in the system because he's been convicted of 2 prior SAs, and he was living in the same apartment complex as Hope when he was 16 years old. Now, Charmaine denies any involvement in Hope's murder, but he does admit to knocking on her door and asking for a glass of water. And then someone came into her apartment with a key, was holding a knife, and forced Charmaine to leave. And then it was this person that ended up murdering Hope. So they made an FBI profile of Charmaine, and he would choose young victims that lived in the same apartment complex as him and would use a ruse to get into these women's apartments. So that's what he did with Hope. He knocked on the door, asked for a glass of water, then he grabbed the knife from her kitchen and then brutally attacked her. She started in the kitchen and then she ran into the bedroom, and that's where he brutally SA'd and murdered her. But then why did some witnesses see and confirm that Leroy was running from Hope's apartment? They had the theory maybe he came into her apartment, found her deceased, and figured he would be blamed for it, so he immediately ran from the apartment. But he denies ever doing this. Charmaine was found guilty of SA and murder, and he was initially sentenced to death. But because he committed this crime when he was only 16 years old, they had to change it from the death sentence to life without parole. I just will never understand what would cause a 16-year-old to brutally SA multiple women and ended up murdering a young mother. Who should we blame in this? Should we blame his parents? He was only 16. So how is he being raised? What is he being taught? At 16 years old, you're worried about your grades in high school. You're worried about sports. You're worried about, dating and stuff. You're not thinking about brutally attacking women and then murdering them. So what caused this to be in his head that he wanted to do this? Now he will spend the rest of his life behind bars and he'll never have a life to live because of the actions that he did. So let me know in the comments below, do we blame his parents for this situation and the way that they raised him? But it's just heartbreaking to see that these young kids can commit such brutal crimes, and it's not right. But let me know what you guys thought of this story in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one, and please take care of yourselves.
Everyone is so focused on Lindsay Clancy, but let's talk about Patrick Clancy. A month after Patrick Clancy's children were murdered, Patrick went on a hike in Costa Rica. Patrick then took the time to write and post a 5-star review about how amazing the hike was, saying, "The hike was amazing. It is short, but lots of stairs. You will be dripping sweat. I'm not sure about the $17. I was the only one there with no one else in sight. There's also 0 cell service." I mean, I can't be the only one who finds this behavior odd, right? Patrick literally described a hiking trail better than he could describe his own children. There are videos where Patrick describes his children like he barely even knew them.
I love my kids. They're wonderful people. They had a lot of friends. Everybody loved them. And they had short lives, but they had really good lives.
I mean, who describes their children like they're distant acquaintances? It was shown on Lindsay Clancy's browser history that she was looking up ways to murder her children. Timestamps show that these searches were actually made by Patrick while Lindsay was taking care of her children at the doctor's office. Patrick had searched how to cut a carotid artery and how to turn airbags off in a Kia Sorento, which is the exact car that Lindsay Clancy drove. I also wanted to show you guys a video where Patrick is just straight up lying in court to make Lindsay look bad.
Did Lindsay ever tell you that she wanted to harm your children?
No.
Tell you she was going to kill your children?
No.
When she told you that she was having intrusive thoughts, did you ask her what they were?
Yeah.
And what was her response?
She described thoughts of hurting the kids.
Of harming the kids, is that correct?
Yeah.
By the way, this is all alleged, and I will keep you guys in the loop as this trial continues. But other than that, what do you guys think about this case?
There is a road that is so haunted, people have actually abandoned their cars in the middle of the night and taken off running on foot just to get away from whatever it was they saw. And I know what you're thinking, why would anyone get out of their car on a dark, empty road in the middle of the night, especially when locals will tell you that if you're driving on this road after dark, whatever you do, don't stop. But once I tell you Julia's story and what happened to her, I think it'll start to make a little bit more sense. So Julia had been visiting her dad at this new care facility he had just been moved into, and although it wasn't late, it was December, so it was already getting getting dark by the time she was getting ready to leave. And as she's walking out into the main lobby, this nurse that's sitting at the front desk casually mentions that there's some construction on the highway, and if she wants to save a little bit of time, there's actually this old back road Julia can take instead. And you know, Julia just politely nods her head, and as she is about to walk out the front door, the nurse quietly says underneath her breath, "Just don't miss the turn." And Julia turns around, she's like, "Wait, what did you say?" And the nurse is like, "Oh, nothing, you know, just don't miss the turn, don't want you getting lost." And she just kind of laughs under her breath a little bit like it's some kind of joke, which was weird for sure, but Julia just thanked her and walked out the door, and I'm sure you can already guess where this is going because, yeah, she missed the turn. And the crazy thing is, she wasn't even that far off. If she had just driven a little bit further, maybe like 100 feet, she would have seen the right road, but it was getting dark, she was already feeling a little bit turned around, and instead of backtracking the way she came, she just figured the road would eventually loop back around. But that's when things started to get strange, and what happened next is burned into Julia's mind. It is something she will never forget. Julia had only been driving for about 5 minutes when she heard and felt this sickening thump against the front of her car. She knew that this could only mean one thing. Her heart instantly started pounding, and without a second thought, she pulled over to check it out because the thought of hitting an animal or a person flashed through her mind and just made her absolutely sick to her stomach. But she barely had the car in park when suddenly a hand slammed against her window, dragging down the glass and leaving behind a gruesome trail of smeared blood. She flinched and closed her eyes for just a second. When she finally worked up the courage to open them again, the hand was gone, but this ugly red streak on her window was still there. Still running on pure adrenaline at this point, she pushed open her car door and slowly stepped out to take a look, but the only light came from her headlights, and there was nothing in the road, nothing in front of her car and nothing behind it. So she went around to the back of her car and started to walk a little bit further down the road towards the direction she had just come from, but she saw nothing. She turned to head back to her car, but the moment she spun around, her heart dropped because her car was gone. The road in front of her was completely empty, not a single sign of her vehicle. And before she could even begin to process what was going on, she whipped her head back around, hoping against all odds that maybe she just got disoriented, that her car was actually the other way. But instead of her car, standing there in the middle of this desolate road was a girl. Julia called out to the girl. She was asking if she was okay, if she was hurt, or how could she help. But the closer Julia got, the more this uneasy feeling started to build in her stomach. Something about the girl was off. She looked like a girl, sure, but there was something about her that wasn't quite right. Maybe it was how her arms seemed a little too long for her body, or the way her lips curled into this smile that didn't quite meet the expression in her eyes. It looked human for only a moment before Julia's eyes adjusted and her brain screamed that deep down, whatever this thing was, it wasn't a little girl and it definitely wasn't human. She knew that if she didn't get away, something really bad was going to happen, so without another thought, she took off running down the road in the opposite direction. Julia ran as fast as her legs would carry her, literally running for her life until she reached the edge of this field that lined the isolated road. But as she ran down the side of the ditch, her foot caught on something, sending her tumbling the rest of the way down. Her head hit the ground hard and everything went black. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the hospital surrounded by nurses who explained that she had been found unconscious in a ditch just a few feet from her car, which according to them was found sitting in the middle of the road with the driver's side door hanging wide open. But when Julia asked them about the girl, about the blood, and about the accident, they just looked at her completely confused and explained that there was no girl, no blood, and definitely no sign of an accident. Her car didn't even have a scratch on it. But here's the thing that still messes with Julia to this day. The one detail she absolutely cannot get out of her head. When she was finally released from the hospital and went to pick up her car from impound, she walked around to the driver's side and there it was, just this faint dusty handprint on the window. It wasn't bloody, but it was there and it matched exactly what she saw that night. Julia still has no idea what she saw or experienced out there on that road, and when she went back to the care facility a few months later to visit her dad and also ask that nurse what the heck was up with that road, the staff told her that no nurse matching that description had ever worked there. If you have made it to the end of this video and you haven't had a chance to check the caption, this is a fictional scary story, which means it was entirely made up and didn't actually happen. If you like this story, be sure to let me know if I should write more scary stories, and I will see you in my next video.
This is the moment right before a father shot and killed the man who had been abusing and kidnapped his son. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Jody Plauché. Jody was born in 1972 and lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was the second oldest of 4 children from his parents, Gary and June. He was a very energetic young boy and loved everything to do with sports. Basketball, football, soccer, he loved all of it. And that was part of the reason that his mum enlisted him into karate lessons. police. His karate instructor was 24-year-old Jeff Doucette, a predator who managed to disguise himself as a charismatic, likable, trustworthy man. Jeff was able to insert himself into the family lives of his karate students, and he zoned in on the Planchet family. Eventually, he became a fixture within the family's lives, coming over to the house for tea, attending family events, attending game nights, and even having sleepovers. He was able to successfully groom not just Jody, but his entire family. Jeff would begin to SA Jody from him being only 10 years old, and this went on for around about a year, escalating all the way up to a fully blown out assault. And initially, Jody didn't realise what Jeff was doing, but by the time that he did realise, he was scared of Jeff, he was intimidated by him, and so he felt like he couldn't say anything. Also, at this time, Jeff and Gary were really close friends, so Jody worried that if he did say something, he might get into trouble. That is how much Jeff was able to manipulate Jody and how much power he held over him. On the 19th of February 1984, Jeff arrived at the Planchet family house and asked June if he could take Jody out with him to run some errands, and also if he could borrow June's car. Seeing no reason why not, June said yes, but only under the condition that he would have Jody back home before it got dark. She had no idea that Jeff had no intentions of ever returning Jody. Unbeknownst to the family, Jeff was actually supposed to be appearing in court soon. He had been writing dodgy checks and was in a massive amount of debt and likely was going to be going to prison, and so he was taken off, he was going on the run, and he was taking Jody with him. Over the next week or so, Jeff would drive Jody across the country. They made a stop in Texas to go to Jeff's mum's house, and eventually made their way to California, over 1,700 miles away from the Planchet home. Jeff dyed Jody's naturally light hair a dark colour and began telling anyone who asked that they were father and son. And throughout his entire captivity with Jeff, Jody would be horrifically SA'd. Meanwhile, back in Louisiana, the Planchet family were frantic. When Jeff didn't return back home with Jody before dark, June really began to worry. She tried waiting out a little bit to see if they were running behind or lost track of time, running a little bit late, but he never came back. She began calling through friends and through family to see if any of them had seen Jody or Jeff, but they hadn't, and June couldn't even go out looking for him herself because Jeff had taken her car. Eventually, not being able to wait any longer, she contacted the police. On the 29th of February, 10 days after Jeff had taken Jody, the phone inside of the Planchet home began to ring. June felt a wave of relief come through her body as when she answered the phone, the voice on the other side was that of her 11-year-old son, Jody. He told her that they were in California and that they were safe. The mother and son spoke for around about a minute before the voice on the other end changed. It was Jeff. He had taken the phone off of Jody and he was now demanding June to bring her and her 3 other children up to California and meet him the following morning. June agreed, however Jeff had no idea that the FBI and the sheriff's office had tapped the phone, traced the call, and now the police were on their way to him. Officers would force entry into a hotel in Anaheim, California, rescuing Jody and arresting Jeff Doucette. Jody was returned to his family the following day and Jeff stayed behind in California awaiting extradition to Louisiana. On the 16th of March, Gary Planchet is sat in a nearby bar drinking. He is eaten up with the guilt of what had happened to his son right under his nose and he had no idea. While sat in this bar, he gets chatting to an ex-co-worker of his. Gary used to work for the local news station somehow and this ex-co-worker still worked for them. Gary and the ex-co-worker get talking and the ex-co-worker says to Gary, "When is Jeff coming back?" Gary says, "Well, they're not going to tell me." And this ex-co-worker reveals that Jeff is being extradited back to Louisiana that very night. Gary would leave the bar knowing exactly what he was going to do next. He would enter the airport armed with a gun. Back then, security wasn't as tight as it is now or post 9/11. He lingered by a row of payphones, giving him a clear view of the arrivals terminal so he could see everyone who was coming off every flight. Determined not to be noticed by the police, of course, Jeff has been extradited extradited, so the police are going to be there. And of course, the police are going to know who Gary was. His son was the victim. He disguised himself. He wore a cap and big round sunglasses. At around about 9:30 p.m, Jeff would arrive at the airport. News crews recorded him being escorted out of the gate. He's wearing a bright red jumper, he has a cocky grin on his face, and his hands are handcuffed behind his back. As he walks past the payphones, in a split second, Gary pulls out his gun and shoots Jeff in the head. Jeff would collapse to the ground and Gary would be ambushed by officers. One of the officers was actually a family friend of Gary, and he cried to him saying, quote, "Why, Gary, why?" To which Gary responded, quote, "If somebody did it to your kid, you'd do it too." Jeff Doucette would die the following morning in the hospital, succumbing to his injuries. Gary spent a total of 3 days in jail before being bailed out to await his trial. When his trial eventually came, in a plea deal, he would plead guilty to manslaughter, and in exchange for this plea, he would receive 5 years probation and 300 hours community service. The judge deeming that prison would serve no use to him, he was clearly not a threat to the public. So for the murder of his son's abuser, Gary Planchet spent 3 days in jail.
This is the story of Randolph Sanders. Randolph is a Philly native with a standard upbringing. In the 80s, he attended Harrison Elementary School, and by the time he had made it to high school in the 90s, he had maintained a clean behavioral record. He engaged heavily in youth sports program, and his main focus was securing athletic recruitment for college, which he got. By the fall of 97, he was enrolled in Chattanooga University of Pennsylvania, which was a HBCU located right outside of Philadelphia. He had become a popular wide receiver and running back for the Chattanooga Wolves, and in 2002, he had graduated with his bachelor's degree to pursue his career in counseling. But he decided to stay at the university and further his education. And he went on to get his master's degree in education to work with high-risk children and families. Fresh out of college, he quickly secured employment at Women's Christian Alliance, which was a major foster care and family service nonprofit in the city. And his coworkers spoke highly of him, saying that he was soft-spoken and very professional. They thought that he was a good fit for the youth. By 2011, he was able to purchase his own home, and everything was going good until mid-2012, when he was fired abruptly for compliance and administrative workplace issues. Struggling to find a job, Randolph runs into an old neighborhood friend by the name of Kim Jones. Now, Kim is also a Philly native. She grew up in a tight-knit religious family, and her and Randolph attended the same middle and high school together, but not at the same time because there's a 20-year age gap between the two. But that's just how long the two have been in the same neighborhood together. Kim has also worked with nonprofits all her life, helping the youth and high-risk children. So when she ran into her old neighborhood friend in late 2012 and he told her that he had got laid off, Kim just so happened to be the director of a program called FAST, which stands for Family and Schools Together, at a company called Turning Points for Children. And when she heard Randolph was looking for employment, she wasted no time making him an assistant director. She known him for a long time. She trusted him so much so that she gave him direct oversight of the program's checkbooks and expense reports. Over the next 2 years, Randolph had proved himself to be a great worker. Him and Kim had got closer. He had attended her wedding in December of 2014. At the end of every year, Kim has to do an end of the year audit for the FAST program's financial ledger. And this year, the numbers were off. Way off. After doing a deep dive, she discovered that $42,000 were missing. And of course, her first thought was Randolph, because he's the assistant director. He has direct authority to sign checks. He managed the card expenses. He can authorize spending. But Kim did not confront him immediately. She wanted to gather as much information as possible. And that's what she did over the next several weeks. She gathered bank receipts, signatures. She got proof that Randolph was taking money from the program and putting it directly into his bank account. On January 12th, Kim skipped all of the steps and went straight to the exclusive leadership and city to show them what they had found. Her plan was to fire Randolph and file criminal charges against him. The meeting was set for the next morning on January 13th, but Kim made the mistake of letting Randolph know. Right after she had set up the meeting, she had called him into her office and told him everything that she had found. And Randolph, Of course, he denied it and said that it was not him. And she's like, all right, but we still going to this meeting on Tuesday morning. And he's terrified. Randolph finished his work shift successfully hiding how nervous he is. But once he got home, he's pacing, trying to figure out what he can do so this information does not get back to the higher ups and ruin his reputation. The next morning, Randolph got dressed in all dark clothing, grabbed his gun, and headed towards Kim's house. He had parked several blocks away and waited. He knew her routine very well. At around 8:45, he hid in a building's breezeway near 12th and Jefferson Street, watching the corner where Kim would normally stand to catch her bus. Kim left the house around 9:10 a.m. and as she's headed to the bus stop, she has her earphones on. So she's completely unaware that she has been watched and followed. As she's getting closer to the bus stop, Randolph is walking quickly behind her. He put the gun to the back of her head and fired one time. He immediately fled on foot and hopping on a subway, which took him to his truck. He drove his truck to a secluded area to change his clothes. He then burned his clothes that he committed the murder in. He drove to a McDonald's parking lot and dumped his gun into a dumpster. And then he clocked into work like nothing ever even happened. And when he got to work and people are saying that Kim is not there, so he decided to call Kim's phone and leave a voicemail saying, are you okay? Because you haven't showed up today. At around 12 p.m., 56-year-old Kim Jones was pronounced dead, but it wasn't until 2 p.m. where the office was notified and Randolph put on a performance. He cried. He's consoling co-workers. He's saying that he cannot believe this. He even called Kim's family, sending his condolences. When Randolph got off work that day, he rode past the crime scene, seeing if they had anything. He checked the news, seeing if they had anything, and he thought that he was scot-free. He even got on the news, did an interview, that's what this is, and said how much he loved Kim, adored Kim. He just was at her wedding. He can't believe that this happened. But it's one thing about today, Randolph, we can't escape these cameras. Now, it took the police a few weeks to gather and watch all the footage from private businesses and homes. And it was a Ring camera that caught him getting into his 2007 Yukon. Now, he was still covered up, but they could see the truck clearly. It was silver. And Kim's workplace, the parking lot, was the first place they checked. And when they rolled up in that parking lot, what did they see? That silver 2007 Yukon. The detective said, we're not even going to bust in there and cause a scene. We're just going to call him and see if he'll come in for questioning. And he agreed, thinking that they're just questioning because they don't got any leads yet. But when Randolph got in that interrogation room, they grilled him for hours and hours until he broke. They got a written confession and a videotaped confession. His trial didn't start till March 1st. 2017. It was a lot of delays. And on trial, he took the stand, recanting his whole statement. He said that the detectives had him in a 30-hour interrogation without food or sleep, and that they coerced him to saying those false things. On March 6th, he was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. His final statement was, I'm sorry for this entire situation. I know what the video shows, but I stand by my innocence. I did not steal that money, nor did I kill Kim. Randolph, we not only have a written confession, we have a videotaped confession. On top of, we have video footage, frame by frame, of you from the bus stop to getting back to your truck. You did it.
The crime scene itself was clean almost. If you look solely at the cause of death, it looked to have happened very quickly, a direct wound to the chest. But it was what was done afterwards, what was done to the body after death, that was cold-blooded, savage, and brutal. Whoever was responsible for ending her life did it with anger. They ended her life, left her body in the bathtub as they cut off the left hand, the right hand, and the head, messing with the body like it was some sort of mannequin. Investigators in that crime scene, in that bathroom, recall it looking like a real-life scary movie, but the rest
rest of the apartment was normal. Actually, not normal, but not for the reasons that you would think, because the apartment was sparkly clean, but the person who lived at the apartment, a college boy's apartment, sparkly clean, didn't really make sense. The floors looked to be recently vacuumed, mopped, the dishes seemed to be clean, but inside the dishwasher was a recently cleaned, massive, sharp weapon. A little pause for a quick intro. What the f was that all about? About banning TikTok, but then taking it back a few minutes later? Like, I think they took the joke a little bit too far. That was so silly, but also miserable. It's kind of giving White Lotus, whatever is going on with the world right now. But I'm gonna be here while I can, and I'm so excited to be telling you guys another story when I wasn't sure if I was going to on this platform. So hi, I missed you for however many hours I was gone for. Today we're talking about Jennifer Cave. Jennifer was one of 4 siblings to her mother, Sharon. In 2002, she graduated from high school in Corpus Christi, Texas, and after visiting Texas State University, she decided that she would enroll and study finance. However, after only 1 semester, she switched her plan around a little bit and decided what would be best for her would be to drop out of Texas State, enroll in Austin Community College, continue to study law, study during the day, and work as a waitress at night. As she was getting closer to graduating, Jennifer got a job at an Austin law firm. She was very excited about starting this job and getting this amazing opportunity to work in a field that she has always wanted to work in. But Jennifer would tragically never make it to see her first day. You ask anyone to describe Jennifer and they will say she was one of the nicest people that I have ever met. She was good, she was kind, and she would get her life ripped away at the hands of 1 person, maybe 2, depending on who you ask. At the start of the investigation, after finding her body, Jennifer Cave would be the name that investigators were focused on, rightfully so. But soon, another woman would become a large focus, Laura Howell, and the connection between them was one that they would have to work really hard to figure out. Jennifer Cave's deceased and dismembered body was found on the morning of August 17th, 2005 in the bathtub of an apartment belonging to Colton Aaron Petoniak. Colton was a friend of Jennifer's and he had a girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend, Laura Howell. Colton and Laura met at a party in the spring of 2005. They dated, but Colton thought that Laura was a little bit too obsessed with him, so he ended their relationship, but the two of them would still frequently have sleepovers, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Anyway, let's go through the timeline. On the night of August 17th, to celebrate Jennifer getting this new job at a law firm, Colton asked Jennifer to come out and celebrate. Jennifer had wanted to go to bed pretty early because she was excited about her first day. She wanted to be well rested for it, but Colton convinced her to go out. At around 1 in the morning that night, friends saw the two of them leave 6th Street area on August 18th. Jennifer was described as looking perfectly fine. Colton was described as acting pretty messed up. The morning after, when Jennifer did not show up for work, her employer called her mother, Sharon, around 3 p.m. back in Corpus Christi. When she answered the phone, the people at the law firm said who they were and explained that they were calling because Jennifer was now employed by them, and her mother said, "Oh yes, she's so excited. Thank you so much for giving her this opportunity." But then it got quiet and the law firm had to tell Sharon the real reason for their call was that Jennifer never made it to the office that day. As soon as she heard that, Sharon knew that something was wrong. She started calling around Jennifer's friends until she found out that the night prior she had been out with her friend Colton. She managed to get Colton on the phone and he was weird. He basically said, "Oh man, no, I wasn't with her. Well, yeah, I saw her for a few minutes, but no, I wasn't with her." And then he hung up the phone. That didn't help. So Jennifer's stepdad, Jim, called Colton back. Colton answered and said something along the lines of, "Hey dude, I'm eating pizza. Don't bother me anymore. Quit calling me." Something bad had happened and they knew it. The next day, August 18th of 2005, Sharon and Jim got in their car to make the 4-hour drive from Corpus Christi to Austin to find their daughter. They arrived to Colton's apartment in the early evening. They saw Jennifer's car parked at that parking lot and they knew that they were in the right place. They knocked, no one answered, so they called 911. Officers arrived at the scene around 8 p.m. but they could not enter the apartment without a search warrant, so they left. But it was agonizing for Sharon and Jim, knowing that there was a very good chance that Jennifer was inside that apartment and preparing for the worst. After the officers left unable to enter the apartment, Jim saw no other option but to crawl inside the apartment himself. He snuck in, crawled through a window, told Sharon to wait outside. Once he made it inside, he said it was pitch black. All he had was a flashlight, and this is a quote from him. "So I kept going down this hallway and there was another door on my left which was closed. I opened that door. It had a light in there. It appeared to be a bathtub. I was seeing something, so I flipped the light switch on and there she was." The remains of Jennifer Cave were in that bathtub, her body in multiple pieces, her hands and her head in trash bags. 911 was called immediately. The operator on the phone started to try and instruct Jim to give CPR, and they were like, "No, you're not understanding. She is gone. This is gruesome, and this is also now a crime scene." The cause of death was believed to be a weapon wound to the chest. The shell of that weapon was found in the bathtub, and the actual weapon was found inside Colton's car. The other 2 weapons presumably used to take the body apart were also found, one in the dishwasher like I mentioned. By the way, in the dishwasher with other regular dishes. Like, it was just a normal cleaning cycle, just cleaning this weapon with my dinner dishes. Colton Petoniak was nowhere to be found, and his ex-girlfriend, Laura Howell, had also disappeared. Colton's car was still parked at his apartment complex, but his phone location was pinging all the way from Austin towards and into Mexico. Authorities got a hold of Laura's parents, and they were terrified for their daughter's safety, because you have these officers telling you that there's this man who just brutally ended the life of a woman, and their daughter is missing with said man. They were scared. Laura's dad was eventually able to get a hold of her, and on the phone she said, quote, "Dad, Colton's unalived someone and they have found a body." She tells her dad, "Colton flipped out. He wanted to get out of town. He ended up saying, 'Take me to Mexico,' and so I did." Laura claimed that she took Colton to Mexico because she was scared for her own life and she felt as if she needed to follow his instructions, but the further they looked into it, it did not look like Laura was in Mexico against her will at all. There's pictures of them on their vacation and they looked to be enjoying themselves. Laura would also later say that those days spent in Mexico were the best days of her life. After 5 days in Mexico, Laura and Colton were found by a Mexican SWAT team and they were turned into American authorities. Once they were back in Austin on August 23rd of 2005, Colton was arrested and charged with murder. Laura was not arrested at first, but she was kind of a disaster. She lied, she was not cooperating, she said things that contradicted themselves, and her story just honestly didn't really make sense. Colton's story was that he didn't remember anything about the night. He did not remember how he got home. He said that he assumed that Jennifer drove him back home, but then he fell asleep. The next thing he knew, he woke up and saw Jennifer's body in the bathtub. So he's saying that he does not remember what happened, does not recall how Jennifer's body got to the state that it was, even though afterwards he went to the hardware store and bought cleaning supplies such as Febreze, masks, gloves, and a weapon. When the person checking him out asked him what he needed these items for, Colton said he was frying a turkey and needed those items to cut it up because it was frozen. Then coincidentally, he starts to get his memory back after Jennifer was no longer alive, but when Laura arrived at his apartment, he says, quote, "I can't remember exactly what I told her, but I know I showed her Jennifer's body." Laura's story was that night Colton called her asking her to come over because they needed to talk, and this is a quote from Laura. "He answered the door really kind of paranoid and fearful, and I'm like just sitting up, 'Colton, what's the deal? What's going on?' I'm kind of starting to freak out a little bit, and he says, 'Come here, come here.' There was an unalived woman curled up in his bathtub, and I said, 'That's a mannequin.' I mean, that's how much I did not believe or want to believe. I was like, man, oh my god, you know, what happened?" Laura said that Colton didn't remember what happened, but after showing him Jennifer's body, Colton just let her go, let her leave, and the investigators talking to Laura said, "Why didn't you call the cops? Did you not, what were you thinking? What were you doing?" To which Laura responded and said, "It didn't seem like a good move. I mean, look, I didn't know what was going to happen if I called the police, okay? There was nothing I could have done to save her life at that point." Laura was eventually arrested as well. In court, Colton turned on Laura, claiming that she was the one responsible because she was jealous of Jennifer. Laura turned on Colton, saying that everything was his fault, from ending Jennifer's life all the way to driving to Mexico, said that it was all his plan. Although apparently Laura had been telling people that she was responsible, and when describing it, she allegedly told a coworker that the worst thing was, quote, "hearing the saw cutting through bone." Colton was found guilty of intentional murder in 2007, and he was sentenced to 55 years. Laura was also sentenced to 10 years for hindering apprehension and tampering with evidence. She has since then been released from prison. Since then, Jennifer's parents have said, "We still feel Jennifer in our lives. She's still a part of us. She had a heart as big as Texas, and that's what got her in trouble." This was a devastating case. I actually hadn't heard of it, and one of you messaged me last night asking me to look into it. I started looking into it this morning, and then I couldn't stop until I researched the entire thing. But honestly, I think I have more questions than answers actually looking into it. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you for spending time with me today. I love you all so much. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. And I will see you in my next video because TikTok isn't banned. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is Cara Robinson. She was kidnapped by a serial killer aged 15 and escaped. And because of how incredibly smart she was, she helped the police catch him. Hi, I'm Meg. I talk about true crime. Let's get into this fascinating case. June 24th, 2002 was just a normal day. Cara was at her friend's house because they had just had a sleepover the night before, and her friend's mom asked them to water the plants outside. Cara was watering the plants at the front of the house, and this takes place in West Columbia in South Carolina. A car had passed Cara once, and she noticed that the car was coming back towards her. The man parked the car on the side of the road and got out. At first, she thought it was a little bit strange, but then she realized the man was holding pamphlets and was like, oh, he's probably trying to sell me something. Cara was only 15, so when the man got out of the car, he asked, "Are your parents home?" And she said, well, this isn't my house, it's my friend's house. He then asked if her friend's parents were home. And Kara said, no, they're not home. The man then said, oh, okay, that's fine. Can I just leave these with you? The man approached to give Kara the pamphlets, and as she went to reach for them, he pulled a gun out. He put the gun to her neck and led her to his car. When he opened the door, there was a storage container in the car, and he forced her to get into it. There's actually a movie about Kara's story, and they recreate this moment, and I've put that in another video. I'll attach it in my comments, so it'll be linked in there if you want to check it out. It also includes a snippet of an interview of her talking about the moment. I also want to say, if someone comes to your front door or anything, never tell them that you're alone. Even if you are, just say like, oh, my parents are home, they're just busy. Something like that. Never say that you're alone. So Kara's in the storage container in the back of his car, and what she did next was incredibly intelligent. She started mentally logging every turn he took in hopes to find her way back home if she escaped. She also started noting certain details. She noticed that he was listening to classic rock music. She noted the cigarettes he was smoking, like the kind of cigarettes. She even memorized the serial number on the storage container that she was in. It's absolutely just genius. I would be freaking out, crying everywhere. Like, I don't know how she was able to do that. When Kara talks about this, she says, my survival mechanism said, all right, let's gather as much information as we can. And she says that fear had barely even kicked in because she was so focused on getting that information. Before getting to her kidnapper's apartment, he actually gagged and handcuffed her. And when he brought her into his apartment, she realized that he had a lot of animals. A lot of animals that not a lot of people have, like a lizard, guinea pigs, other small animals, fish. And once again, she was taking note of it. What Kara endured for the rest of that day and evening was what I can only describe to be hell. She was repeatedly assaulted and went through something that no human should have to go through ever, and she was only 15. And despite the just pure trauma she probably endured in those moments, she managed to stay focused on escaping and coming up with a plan. Kara really found a way of manipulating her captor. She would ask him, like, can I do anything for you? Can I do anything to help out? And so her captor was like, yeah, sweep the floor in the kitchen. And so when she was sweeping the floor in the kitchen, she was looking around, gathering as much information about this man as she could. On the fridge was doctor notes, so she had the name of his doctor, she had the name of his dentist. Like, I think if I was her, I'd be paralyzed by fear, and I would just think, like, I'm not gonna make it out of here. But she never really thought like that. She was in full, like, survival mode. How am I gonna get out of here? She managed to get her captor's trust in a matter of hours almost. He probably thought that he had chosen a super easy victim, but little did he know, he messed with the wrong girl. Her entire first night was spent waiting for him to fall asleep, till around dawn, when she decided to try to escape. Kara managed to wiggle one of her hands out of the handcuffs, and it's with that hand that she was able to untie her leg restraints. And she had to do so as quietly as she possibly could, not to wake this man up. I can't imagine the adrenaline that must have been going through her in that moment, because you know, if you make one loud noise, like you're done, he's gonna wake up. Once she got out of her leg restraints, she made her way to the front door and booked it. Eventually, she came across two people sat in a car, and she begged them to take her to the police station. They agreed to take Kara to the police station, and when she got there, she had a lot of information to give them. I'm not even joking, it took me like a year to learn my own phone number. I have no idea at the age of 15 how she was able to retain as much information as she did. Luckily, the police were able to find the apartment that she ran out of, and what they found in that apartment was so much worse than they thought it would be. Kara was not this man's first victim. He was not in the apartment when the police got there, by the way, but what they found was newspaper clippings. And these newspaper clippings had cases that were unsolved murders of 3 young girls.
These unsolved murders had been unsolved for like over 5 years, I believe. And that's when it suddenly hit the police that they were dealing with a serial killer. You're probably wondering, Meg, who was the serial killer? His name was Richard Ivanitz, a serial killer who had killed at least 3 young girls. And the families of those 3 young girls never thought that they'd get closure or find out what happened. And it's crazy to think that if Kara hadn't been as smart as she was, she might have ended up like those girls. And God knows how many more girls would have fallen victim to this man, and who knows if he would have ever been caught in the first place. Police did eventually track Richard down, and there was a bit of a car chase, but then Richard turned his gun to himself and he ended his own life. Kara received $150,000 for helping solve these murders that could have gone forever unsolved, and she was able to meet the family of the victims. She helped give them closure and helped them move on. Kara is a very inspirational person. I have watched quite a few of her interviews. She is a dedicated victims advocate, a public speaker, an author, an executive producer, and she's even here on TikTok, I believe. So if you somehow end up watching this, I hope that I did your story justice. And I just want to say that you are, like I said, extremely inspirational. I also want to say that I never mean any disrespect when covering these cases. I think that her story deserves to be told and deserves to be heard by everyone because she's so smart. Here's her now, here's her family. It's so nice to see someone who's overcome her trauma. I mean, I can't imagine that it ever goes away, but she's a very successful woman who has used her experience to help others, and I really respect that. Anyways, that is the story of Kara Robinson Chamberlain, I think is her full name now. If you want to see the recreation of the kidnapping scene to get a better idea, I will post that directly after this video and it'll be pinned in the comment section. Also, don't forget to follow me on here if you're not already. I post a bunch of true crime videos. And turn your notifications on so you get notified every time I post a new one. I also have a newish Instagram and I feel like nobody follows me on there and it's a bit awkward, so please follow my Instagram. Let me know what case you guys want me to cover next and I'll see you there. Bye.
This is the story of Nathaniel Rowland. Born and raised in South Carolina, Nathaniel was described as a normal, quiet teenager. He attended East Clarendon High School, where he joined the varsity basketball team. In 2017, he went on to enroll in South Carolina State University, which caused him to move to Orangeburg, South Carolina. But it was very short-lived. Not even a year later, he had dropped out of school. Nathaniel moved back home and started working odd jobs, but his criminal slate was still clean with nothing but a seatbelt violation on it until October 2018 when he was hit with a felony charge. 2 men carjacked a young lady, made her drive to an ATM, take money out to give to them, then made her drive to her home where they proceeded to take more of her shit, including her PlayStation 4. Just hours after the kidnap and robbery, Nathaniel took the stolen goods to a local pawn shop and sold it for cash. Now, to get the cash, he had to sign his signature, and he used his real name. So when the young lady they robbed filed her police report and said what her stolen goods were, they got Nathaniel, but they could not get him on the kidnapping charge because they did not have enough proof. So he was hit with a felony charge of property under false pretenses. So they don't know if it was actually him who did the robbery. I think it was. But he had bonded out and was awaiting his court date. But if he would have stayed in, that probably could have saved this next young lady's life. On March 28th, 2019, Nathaniel went to go stay the night at his girlfriend's house. And she woke up in the middle of the night and noticed that he was not there. Where was he at? Cruising the streets of downtown Columbia. Nathaniel was in the 5 Point nightlife district area when he seen a young lady standing at the corner looking at her phone and looking at his car, looking at her phone and looking at his car. So he slows down and pulls over, and she gets in the back seat. And that young lady was 21-year-old Samantha Josephson. Samantha is from New Jersey, and she had relocated to Columbia to attend USC, majoring in political science. Samantha was a senior about to graduate. She also got a full academic scholarship to law school. So the night of March 28th, her and her friends was out celebrating their accomplishments. Her and her friends went to Bird Dog Bar on Hardin Street, and around 1:50 a.m. she decided to step away to FaceTime her boyfriend. She then decided that she wanted to go home, so she called herself an Uber. Now her first Uber canceled on her because she wasn't in the spot that she said she was. So she called another Uber, and she thought that this Impala was her Uber. As soon as she got in and shut the door, Nathaniel hit the child lock and took off. Samantha is realizing that this is not her Uber. He drove her to a secluded area where he beat and stabbed her 120 times in her head, her torso, her arms, her legs, everywhere, and she put up a fight. So much so that on the evidence pictures, you can see her footprints in his window. She had bled out in his car, and there was so much blood that he was panicking. She had died probably 10-20 minutes of being inside of the car. He did not know what to do, so he decided to drive about 70 miles to his hometown, New Zion. Nathaniel drove to a remote, heavily wooded area just 2 miles from his family's house. That's where he decided to dump Samantha's body. He then drove all the way back to Columbia and attempted to use her card 9 times at various places, but could not get past the PIN code. It is now around 8:30 a.m. and Samantha's roommate is waking up and realizing that she's not there. So she decided to call her phone, but it's going straight to voicemail. And at around 10 a.m., Nathaniel is walking into an electronic repair shop trying to sell Samantha's phone. Boy, are you a crackhead. That man said, no, I don't want to buy this. Nathaniel then linked back up with his girlfriend, who witnessed him cleaning pools of blood out of his car with bleach, wipes, and Windex. Meanwhile, Samantha's friends are retracing their steps. They went back to where they were at the night before. They started asking people, have they seen her? And at around 1:30 p.m., when she did not show up for her shift at work, they decided to call 911. Because this was out of her character, they labeled this a high-risk case, which means they immediately started pulling footage and interviewing bar staff. But around 3:45 p.m., about 70 miles away in New Zion, 2 turkey hunters are walking through a remote wooded area and came across the body of 21-year-old Samantha. By that night, the police had obtained this footage of Samantha getting into the black Impala and put out a bolo, aka be on the lookout. And at around 2:30 a.m., the police pulled over a black Impala riding through 5 Points, just a couple blocks from where Samantha was taken. And who was it? Nathaniel. When the police got up to the car, he rolled the window down, smoke smelling like weed. When the police asked him to step out, he took off. He was quickly tackled and put in handcuffs. But what did they find in his car? Samantha's phone, along with her keys, blood on the seats. They could still see her footprints in his car windows. So what was you cleaning? Nathaniel was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping, but he said that he did not do it. He said that he went to a party that night, drunk, fell asleep, and somebody took his keys and did these things. And he stood by his innocence. His trial started in July of 2021, and they had what the police called an avalanche of evidence against him. They was pulling out evidence every which way on Nathaniel. Nathaniel was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But his final statement was, I know that I'm innocent, but I guess what I know does not matter. But I wish the justice system would have did more to find the actual person instead of being satisfied with blaming it on me. Nathaniel, her blood was under your fingernails. Her blood was all in your car. Your girlfriend testified against you, saying that she seen you scrubbing the blood out of your car. She woke up and you was not there the night of the murder. Her blood was on your shoes and socks the night you were arrested, which means you didn't even give a fuck enough to even change them. The man at the electronic repair shop pointed you out and said you were the one trying to sell him Samantha's cell phone. Not to mention your cell phone pinged everywhere Samantha's cell phone pinged after she was in your car. This is what they mean when they say an avalanche of evidence against you, my boy. The fuck do you think we're stupid or something? Get cozy in there. Get cozy. You're not going anywhere.
Someone lured a 9-month pregnant woman into an apartment and tried to cut her baby out. It's December of 2009, and 29-year-old Tika Adams was staying at a maternity home in Washington, D.C., just trying to get her life back on track before her daughter was born. Around the same time, Tika started receiving calls from an unknown number. At first, she didn't answer, but when she finally picked up, a woman on the other end introduced herself as Stephanie Mills. Stephanie explained to Tika that she actually worked with a company that helped struggling pregnant women by providing them with a whole bunch of baby clothes and other supplies that they may need, and she said that there were a whole bunch of other items waiting inside of this storage unit in Maryland. So if Tika wanted, Stephanie could pick her up, take her there to grab everything that she needed, and bring her back to DC later that same day. Now, Tika wasn't usually one to accept an offer like this from a stranger, but after speaking with her for a little while, it seemed pretty legit, so eventually, she agreed to go. The following morning, as Tika got dressed, she called her husband PJ and told him about her plans to go and meet up with Stephanie. And he was so worried that he practically begged her to not get into this stranger's car. He just couldn't understand why Stephanie couldn't bring the items to her. It's really not that difficult. But Tika reassured him that everything would be fine. And not long after that, at around 6:30 in the morning, just as they planned, Stephanie pulled up across from the shelter, Tika climbed into the car, and together they headed towards Maryland. At first, the two women just made some small talk. Stephanie asked about her pregnancy, Tika talked about her husband and the shelter and about the company that she worked for. It was really nothing crazy. But somewhere along the drive, Stephanie suddenly told her, I am so sorry, the car is acting up. And said that before they could get to the storage unit in Maryland, they would have to swing by her apartment so that somebody could come and take a look at it. And Tika, seeing that she didn't really have much control over the sudden change of plans, and she really did need those supplies, said that it was fine. Eventually, they arrived at the apartment, and Stephanie led her into this small bedroom so that she could sit on the mattress and watch TV while they waited. And Tika waited and waited and waited and waited, but now several hours have passed and the car still wasn't fixed. And the later it got, the more worried she became because the shelter had a strict curfew, and if Tika missed it, she risked losing her spot and having nowhere else to stay. But as she sat there, this heavy blanket dropped over Tika's head, and before she could even react, she suddenly felt something hard slam onto the side of her head. Then it hit her again and again. She immediately curled herself around her belly, trying to protect her head and her baby at the same time, taking hit after hit until everything just went black and she lost consciousness. When Tika finally opened her eyes, she was lying on the kitchen floor. Her head was pounding. Blood was running down the side of her face and into her eyes. And when she finally looked up, Stephanie was standing over her with a box cutter into the side of her stomach. And with adrenaline surging through her, Tika reached up and managed to snatch the box cutter out of Stephanie's hand and somehow force herself back onto her feet. And as she did this, she started slowly backing away to try and look for an exit. But she was so dizzy from all the blows to her head that she was practically stumbling side to side, just trying to keep up with her balance. And eventually, as she was backing away from Stephanie, her back hit a door. And now she could feel this huge sense of relief, like, okay, I'm safe now, because all she had to do was turn the doorknob and open the door. But when she reached it, she realized there were several different locks bolted onto the door, and with Stephanie just a few feet away from her, she couldn't figure out which one she needed to undo first. So, needing more time, she held the blade out in front of her and warned Stephanie to not come any closer as she looked over her shoulder to try to figure out which lock to undo first, which one opens the door. door. But before she could figure it out, Stephanie suddenly lunged at her and swung this heavy metal bar, hitting her directly in the head again. Now Stephanie was right on top of her, and with the box cutter still in Tika's hand, there was no way she could risk dropping it between them and letting Stephanie take it back. So she flung it across the apartment, and within seconds, the two women slammed into each other and they started grabbing and twisting and just fighting at each other, trying to get on top. Tika somehow managed to use what little strength she had left to roll Stephanie over, but the second she got on top, Stephanie wrapped both her legs around Tika's 9-month pregnant stomach and started squeezing as hard as she could. Tika could feel Stephanie's legs tightening around her stomach harder and harder, like she was deliberately trying to crush the baby inside of her. So Tika reached forward, wrapped her hands around Stephanie's throat, and tightened her grip until Stephanie finally dropped the metal bar. But Tika was already badly hurt. And even with Stephanie pinned underneath her, she could feel herself getting weaker. She'd been hit over the head over and over. She was losing blood, and now her arms were starting to give out. So eventually, Tika realized she just couldn't keep fighting like this. She let go, slid back against the wall, and begged Stephanie to not hurt her anymore. Let's just call it a truce. Because by that point, she wasn't even trying to win the fight anymore. She was just trying to keep herself and her baby alive long enough to figure out what to do next. And so Stephanie told her, okay, she wouldn't hurt her again. But that didn't mean that she was just gonna let her leave. Instead, Stephanie moved Tika into the bedroom and put her on a mattress. And when Stephanie's 17-year-old son came into the room, he held Tika down while Stephanie tied her wrists and ankles together. And once Tika couldn't move or try to fight back, that changed everything. Because now she couldn't make another run for the door. She couldn't overpower Stephanie again, and she couldn't physically force her way out of that room. So at that point, the only thing that Tika could really do was wait for Stephanie to give her some kind of opening, which meant paying attention to the small things that Stephanie would do, like when she left the room, when she got distracted, when she seemed tired. But that opening didn't come that night. And when the next day came and went without Tika getting a single chance to escape, she was still trapped there. And for whatever messed up reason, Stephanie still hadn't let her go. On Saturday afternoon, after 3 whole days trapped inside of that apartment, Stephanie walked into the bedroom carrying a whole bunch of knives and box cutters. She put a bowl of ice water and some towels beside the mattress, retied Tika's hands together even tighter, and then stuffed a cloth into her mouth and wrapped duct tape around her entire head to keep it in place. Then Stephanie sat down next to her and finally told her why she had been keeping her hostage all these days. The baby. Stephanie was getting ready to take the baby out herself. So now Tika was lying on this mattress with her hands tied together and a cloth shoved into her mouth, feeling Stephanie cut into the same stomach she had spent the last 9 months protecting. Stephanie through Tika's entire abdominal wall, and then she used her hands to pull the opening even wider and feel around for the baby inside of her. And after making another fluid suddenly started pouring out, but it wasn't the baby's water sac. Stephanie actually into Tika's bladder, but she didn't realize that. She looked at Tika and said, "Oh, I just cut the water sac. All I have to do is reach in and get the baby out. Do you want me to do that now, or do you want to go to sleep?" But by that point, Tika was already in unbearable pain. I mean, her whole abdomen had just been open. Her bladder was severely damaged, and she didn't know if her baby was still alive or not. So she told Stephanie that yes, she did want to take a break and go to sleep. And when Stephanie agreed to stop, the exhaustion finally caught up with her too. So she stretched out across the floor right beside the mattress, closed her eyes, and eventually fell asleep. But early the next morning, while the room was still completely dark, Tika opened her eyes and immediately looked beside the mattress and saw that Stephanie was still there, asleep on the floor. And seeing her there, knocked out, Tika realized this might be the first real opening that she's had since being trapped in the apartment. So instead of moving right away and risking waking her up, she stayed completely still for just a few minutes, watching Stephanie and making sure that, she was really asleep. And once Tika felt sure that there was no way she was faking this, she started working at the cloth around her wrist, pulling and trying to twist it until the cloth finally loosened up and she yanked her hands free. Then, without wasting any time, Tika started pushing herself up off the mattress as quietly as she could before Stephanie could get a chance to wake up. But after everything her body had just been through, even lifting herself upright was difficult. And as she shifted her weight from left to right, trying to get some balance, her body accidentally bumped into the glass bowl beside the mattress. Stephanie's eyes shot open and Tika froze in place. Oh my gosh. Stephanie's head turned toward Tika, her eyes widened, and suddenly she was staring right at her. You can only imagine how hard her heart was pounding at this point. And Tika stayed completely still, waiting to see what she was about to do. And then Stephanie closed her eyes. Tika still didn't move because closing her eyes didn't necessarily mean that Stephanie was asleep. So she stayed exactly where she was, watching her and waiting to see if she'd move again. A few minutes passed without Stephanie moving a single inch. And once Tika felt super sure that she had actually fallen back to sleep, she slowly started lifting herself up again, very quietly. But getting up was almost as hard as getting free. Tika had already lost a tremendous amount of blood, and the second she managed to get onto her feet and step over Stephanie, the opening across her stomach started pulling apart again. Her legs nearly gave out. So Tika reached over to the wall with one hand to keep herself upright, pressed the other hand against her abdomen, and she started inching toward the front of the bedroom, taking these really tiny, careful steps, and somehow she made it out of the bedroom. But the second she looked into the living room, there was another problem. Stephanie's 17-year-old son, the same son who had helped his mother hold down Tika and tie her up, was asleep on the couch. And the couch was sitting right in between Tika and the front door. So Tika, still with one hand pressed against her stomach, trying to keep it closed, started inching across the living room floor, trying to stay as quiet as possible. And the closer she got to the couch, the more careful she had to be, because all it takes is one bad step, one scrape against the wall, and he would wake up and drag her right back into the room. So she kept moving, even as every step she took pulled at the hole across her stomach. So she finally made it past the couch and reached the door. But getting to the door was only half of it, because Stephanie had several locks on it. And now Tika had to work through every single one of them without making enough noise to wake either of them. So she started undoing them as quietly as she could, one after another, until she finally reached the last one, turned the knob, and pulled the door open. The second she stepped outside, freezing air hit her face. She had no shoes, no coat, and there was snow all over the ground. But none of that mattered compared to the fact that she was finally out of the apartment. Tika stumbled toward the stairs as quickly as she could before Stephanie or her son realized that she was gone. And with her stomach still open and her body barely holding it together, she somehow made it to a nearby apartment and started kicking at the door and just screaming for help. But before anyone could hear her or open it, Stephanie's son came outside, saw Tika hunched over in front of another person's door, and he yelled back to his mom, Stephanie, that she had escaped. And within seconds, Stephanie came rushing outside with a knife in her hand. She grabbed Tika by the arms and told her son to take her legs, and together they started dragging this badly injured 9-month pregnant woman back into the apartment that she had just fought so hard to escape. But Tika wasn't going back there. I mean, she couldn't. She had a baby to protect. So she kicked and fought and punched everywhere with every strength that she had left, trying to make it impossible for them to drag her through the door. And the noise from all of this finally brought a man from another apartment outside to see what all this commotion was about. Tika is yelling at him to help her, please, she's being held captive. But Stephanie immediately just started talking over her, telling the man, ignore her, she's just confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. So Tika stopped trying to yell and beg over her, and all she did was lift up her shirt. And the second that man saw what had been done to her stomach, there was nothing that Stephanie could say to explain this away. So he told Stephanie that he was calling the police. Tika got rushed to the hospital where doctors performed an emergency C-section. And while they were doing everything they could to save both of them, police surrounded the apartment and arrested Stephanie. But it would turn out that Stephanie Mills never actually existed. The woman who offered Tika those baby supplies and held her captive for 4 days was really named Veronica de Ramauz. And investigators discovered that Veronica had been telling people that she was pregnant even though she wasn't. So they believe that she had planned to take Tika's daughter and pass her baby off as her own. Veronica was eventually sentenced to 25 years for the assault and received a life sentence for false imprisonment, with most of it suspended. Her 17-year-old son was never charged because investigators said they didn't believe he fully understood what his mother was trying to do and had mostly just been following her instructions. But after everything Veronica did trying to take her baby away from her, Tika survived, and when she finally left the hospital, she did so with a healthy baby girl she named Miracle. That is all for today. Please be safe out there, and of course, group hug.